There's many paths to the same destination, and the best diet's the one you'll follow. The training stimulus is more important than protein.
Is there some compelling research that we can reverse our insulin resistance in some ways?
Well, now you're broaching a really hot topic. Sugar does not cause insulin resistance. I've always been a proponent of cutting fats first and keeping the carbs in there because we do see a performance advantage.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're here at Pickleball World Champion.
That's right.
Dan Efferding.
Oh, it's hilarious. You remember when I was up there, I was telling Nsima that pickleball was a lot like jiu-jitsu.
Oh, yeah, and you were comparing your pickleball career.
I was comparing pickleball to jiu-jitsu. And, Nsima, he's the nicest guy in the world. And initially, he kind of looked at me confused, like he must be joking. But he didn't let on, and then I kept going with it, right? Well, because you just show up, and you grab a partner, and you play, and so I start describing why they're similar. And he's like starts nodding his head agreeably. And I'm just pulling his chain. So I sent him a picture yesterday or a video yesterday. I said, see, pickleball, just like jiu-jitsu. Poor guy. He just doesn't have the meanness in him to tell me to go fuck myself.
He didn't want to tell you just how old you are.
Yeah. He's like, here's a world champion black belt in jiu-jitsu. And I'm like, oh yeah, pickleball is the same.
We did have a guest on the show yesterday that was talking a lot about like performance enhancing drugs and this and that. And Nsima, like after every time the guy ended his thing that he was saying about these performance enhancing drugs, he's like, but what's the side effects? What's the side effects? Gotta be some sort of side effect. What's the downside?
There's no downside, Nsima. The downside is
the downside
huge, jacked. Yeah, you'll smash even more.
All right, huge. Well, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show today, I have you on the show all the time. We talk all the time, but I wanted to talk to you about the sugar diet and I don't know, just like what are some positives of sugar, because people kind of demonize sugar, and what are some negative drawbacks of sugar, and then the confines or context of this particular diet that I've kind of stumbled upon. I'm only consuming like 30 grams of fat a day, which I know could be viewed as like maybe unhealthy, and we can talk about that. And then also I'm lowering my protein down to like 100. And last we spoke, you were like, I think the unfortunate truth for you and I is that we might need to downsize in terms of even our muscle mass and stuff like that. So that's what I would like to dive into today with you.
Yeah, a lot to talk about. I've been watching some of your posts recently, and the comment section is an absolute dumpster fire of misconceptions and a whole host of other finger pointing. So it'll be good to go over all these topics together. And kudos to you. I've said this many times that one thing about you is that you actually try these things. The vertical diet hasn't changed much in over a decade, but I had 30 years of experience through my own experimentation before I came to what my recommendations are for that diet. But you've gone through, and some people think this is a bad thing, but I think it's a good thing. You've gone through keto and carnivore, intermittent fasting, and you were persistent and consistent with each of those. And you even had one time you put out and you said, we're going to do the vertical diet this month, we're going to do carnivore this month, we're going to do keto this month. And hats off, because I think opening up a large tent here for everyone to be able to participate in. I think it's important to say that, I've said many times, there's many paths to the same destination, and the best diet's the one you'll follow. And people respond very differently to different diets. And that doesn't mean that there's a best diet. There might be a best diet for you, but how do you know if you don't try each of these things? So you've been really consistent in doing that. And I think some of the foundational principles are still in play. I mean, calories are king. All diets work, and they work for the same reason, because if you can create a calorie deficit, whether it be by caloric restriction or dietary restriction, that would be, elimination diets, cutting out carbs or vegan or carnivore, or by time restriction, which, we've all gone through the intermittent fasting, every part of that. And so if by any of those pathways you can create a calorie deficit, and one of those pathways is easier for you, then by all means, that's the one that you should pursue. I think Lane Norton says the one that feels the least restrictive, because hunger usually the thing that's going to cause you the most problems. And then, after calories, you want to get adequate protein. But, looking at Stu Phillips' research at McMaster University, I think people largely recognize him as one of the foremost authorities in the world on protein metabolism. And he's, even at 1.2 grams per kilogram, you can get sufficient protein to maximize muscle protein synthesis. I think he feels that 0.8 grams per kilogram, that's 0.4 grams per pound or thereabouts, can be a little low, depending on whether or not you're getting an adequate training stimulus, which is more important than the protein, really, at some point. The training stimulus is more important than protein, and that's a quote from Stu Phillips. Understanding that at some point you can get too little, but what that point is probably below 0.4 grams per pound of body weight, which you just described to me. If you're nearing 200 pounds, that's only 80 grams of protein a day would be sufficient for you to maintain your lean mass, and you're over 100 grams. So you're up at 0.5, 0.6, which is about 1.2 grams per kilogram, which is kind of on the lower end of the optimal recommendations of 1.2 to 1.6 grams per kilogram. And you're right in the ballpark on that. And again, like you said, even if you lose a little bit of muscle tissue, you have plenty to spare because of all that you've accumulated over the years. And the additional muscle that you have probably isn't going to be of any great benefit for your current goals, and certainly you couldn't argue it's of any greater benefit for your long-term health span or lifespan. You've got more than you need, and so
even when someone's meticulous with their diet, even a bodybuilder, even somebody that is using performance-enhancing drugs, you're always going to lose some muscle mass, right? Like when you're dieting. What's been your experience for yourself, and what's been the experience of maybe coaching people through that process? Do they always lose at least a little bit of muscle mass when they're dieting?
Yeah, and you'll find that in athletes in particular, people who are as lean as you are or as I am, it becomes harder and harder to hold on to that muscle mass over time. Again, the major factor is going to be the training stimulus, and you train very hard and very consistently. In a lot of those studies that Stu performs and others have performed, they show that the more intense the training stimulus, the more muscle you can maintain. But you do get, at the end of those studies, they do show that the participants are pretty tired. So yeah, it's just a matter of how lean you're trying to get. I mean, once you get down under 8%, there's going to be some muscle tissue loss. There's no question. Let me just finish off on the big tent thing, on things we can agree upon. Calories are king, getting adequate protein. I'll just quickly say adequate micronutrients, and usually, I encourage my clients to use a chronometer or a chronometer, however you pronounce it, an app that just plug all your food in and see if you have adequate recommended daily allowances of vitamins and minerals. And the next one's fat, that you touched on. You have a very low fat diet, and you mentioned that you're down to 60 grams.
30 grams.
30 grams. Well, there's a really interesting body of work that was done over a year ago by Mass Research Review and Eric Trexler, I believe, where as little as 20 grams a day was sufficient for providing you the essential fatty acids that are necessary for health and for allowing you to absorb fat-soluble vitamins. He did mention that you might need as many as 40 grams a day to optimize sex hormones, but you're on TRT currently, so I don't think that's going to be an issue. So 30 grams a day is sufficient for health. I've said many years ago, probably a decade ago now in my Iceland seminar, that fats beyond which provide you a health benefit don't provide you any additional performance benefit. And that was the having adequate glycogen and carbohydrates to fuel anaerobic performance, which is the bulk of what you do, sprinting and training the way you do. So I would say, carbohydrates are preferable for you, and that's kind of what I always promoted with the vertical diet. So I think those that's the big tent. I think everybody can participate in those things and agree on those things. And then you and I will go down and talk about all the things that I see in your comment section that people don't agree on.
When it comes to calories, let's talk about that for a moment, because I think that you've done such a great job. The vertical diet, I've told people for a long time, you know, I recommend it to so many people. I don't always recommend it to everybody because everybody's a little different, but I do recommend it to a lot of people. And I say one thing that Stan's done a great job of is promoting that your diet is still nutritious and nutritional and providing you the nutrients that you need, both the macronutrients and the micronutrients. And you're one of the few people that I've seen promoting correct me if I'm wrong, but promoting eating more, where most people were always promoting eating less. And I know you have specifics of your diet. If somebody wants to be really lean, or if someone's playing football, like there's some manipulation of some of the things that you can do. But again, correct me if I'm wrong on this. I believe your diet calls for like 33% of the diet coming from fat. And I think some people, they took your Monster Mash and they went like, 80-20 ground beef, pounds and pounds of that, and a bunch of rice. And maybe they use the diet for powerlifting and strongman and stuff. But you can utilize the same diet for bodybuilding. It's just that maybe in some cases you would want to control some of the fat to help control calories. But beyond that, let's talk a little bit about increasing your metabolic rate via eating more food. Like we can do that, right?
We don't see a significant amount there, and people on both ends of this argument have claimed that. There's been some studies where keto folks have claimed that there's an upregulation of energy pathways but unfortunately there were some confounding variables there with using doubly labeled water, etc. We don't find it to be a compelling in terms of the energy balance equation that, we used to think the same thing about meal frequency. Eating 6 times a day would spike your metabolism more than 3 times a day. And come to find out that it's pretty equivocal. And now that the macronutrients that you eat, the only one that significantly influences energy expenditure is going to be protein as a result of the thermic effect of food. And even there, you're talking about a small difference, maybe 50 calories a day with a higher protein versus a lower protein diet. It's just not meaningful in that regard. So I can't put my finger on a body of research that would suggest that just by eating less fat and more carbs is going to affect the energy balance equation.
Have you seen anything about like this FGF21 that some people are talking about, and the increase of that, and that could potentially, in the absence of fat, and it actually seems like protein maybe has a disruption of FGF21. It also appears that we could, so there's the calorie equation, like whether we can increase our metabolic rate, and you're saying you're not seeing a lot of compelling evidence there. Is there some compelling research that we can reverse our insulin resistance in some ways and maybe become more insulin sensitive, and maybe via becoming more insulin sensitive, maybe somebody could potentially over the course of weeks, months, years, be consuming more calories and utilizing their energy that they're taking in more efficiently, perhaps?
Well, now you're broaching a really hot topic in this discussion about carbohydrate consumption and the macronutrients. What we know about insulin resistance, there is what has been what's called the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity or weight gain that's been promoted by particular influencers on the internet. Unfortunately, it's putting the cart before the horse. It's actually backwards. They propose that if you raise your insulin, that you're going to increase fat storage and hunger and those kinds of things. And that's been repeatedly proven to be inaccurate, suggesting that calories are downstream of insulin. That's been promoted by a lot of, Dr. Jason Fung. I think Lustig is another one, Glucose Goddess. There's no ending of the folks who demonize carbohydrates in general, or sugar specifically, and we'll get into the difference between the two. But that has been something that social media has perpetuated, even though we've known for probably 20 years with dozens of randomized controlled trials, human trials, whether it's the Diet Fits trial or Kevin Hall's research on ultra-processed food. And of course, Alan Aragon and Dr. Ids has gone over this extensively. But we know that when you control for calories and protein, Where you put your carb and fat percentages does not matter in terms of body fat or insulin markers. The actual cause of insulin resistance. People think that sugar causes insulin resistance. This is an important conversation because I see a lot of folks in your comments that have this same misconception. Sugar does not cause insulin resistance. Now, if you are insulin resistant, which is about, I think 60+% of the population is pre-diabetic or diabetic. We've got about 70% overweight or obese, and something, I think it's in the high 40% or low 40% that are obese. So there is a lot of insulin resistance out there. If you are insulin resistant, the sugar didn't cause that, but eating sugar when you're insulin resistant can impact the symptoms of insulin resistance of type 2 diabetes. And that's an important distinction to make. And you have to be able to hold both of these truths equally. Sugar can cause a lot of problems for people. Sugar and carbohydrates can cause problems for people with diabetes, but sugar does not cause diabetes. Diabetes is caused by energy toxicity. This is Dr. Roy Taylor's work, and he's got the book Reversing Diabetes, and his work is pertaining to what's called the twin cycle hypothesis. And Dr. Roy Taylor has shown that insulin resistance is downstream of energy toxicity. Energy toxicity is obviously just too many calories, of any type of calories. And once you've filled your fat storage, any calories that you eat will be utilized or stored. And once you've filled your fat storage and recognize that different people have different available amounts of fat storage. You look at folks from India, they don't have a lot of subcutaneous peripheral fat. It almost immediately goes to central adiposity, visceral fat, and into the liver and the organs. And so you won't see a lot of folks that are obese when looking at, say, the obesity scale, but you'll see a lot of people with NAFLD and insulin resistance as a result of just not having a lot of available fat storage. People with a lot of subcutaneous fat storage capability, will store a lot of fat in their hips and their butt and their belly, and it's the kind that hangs out over the belt. That fat isn't necessarily or isn't anywhere near as pathological as the fat that goes into the organs, into the liver and into the pancreas. So that's your NAFLD, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and that's caused by running out of places to store food, carbohydrates, fats, not just sugar, in your fat storage, and so it starts accumulating in the liver. And once it accumulates in the liver, now you start to see insulin resistance, and then it overflows into the pancreas, and now you've got big problems. That is what causes diabetes, is energy toxicity, overfilling your fat storage, NAFLD, and then pancreatic fat. Sugar doesn't cause that, and we have dozens of trials substituting fats and sugars in a eukaloric diet, in the absence of an excess of calories. It doesn't show any increase in insulin resistance. As a matter of fact, saturated fats do show, even in a eukaloric diet, progression of NAFLD, and in a caloric excess, saturated fat increases NAFLD at twice the rate of sugar. So if you're going to be concerned about anything, it's going to be about saturated fats in terms of their adverse effects on diabetes. And so that's the bulk of the data that we have on sugar and insulin resistance. Sugar does not cause diabetes, but sugar can aggravate the symptoms for diabetics. It's important to say now that if you are diabetic, any weight loss on any diet, irrespective of carbohydrate or fat consumption, will reverse NAFLD and type 2 diabetes if the weight loss is significant enough. 7% weight loss will result in about 50% resolution NAFLD, and up to a 15% weight loss by any diet. And we've talked about this before with the McDonald's diet and the Twinkie diet, the 7-Eleven diet, and with any diet, meaning any percentage of carbs and fats. If you're in a calorie deficit and you lose 15% of your body weight, you can reverse type 2 diabetes for those people who don't already have a irreversible damage to their pancreas. So sometimes that does happen. The beta cells get damaged. So it's important to recognize that what causes insulin resistance and what cures insulin resistance is still calories on both ends of the equation, irrespective of sugar consumption or fat consumption percentages.
Yeah, it's amazing. Have you had a chance to see anything about like sugar diet, honey diet, and this potential of maybe people are producing more of this hormone FGF21, and it's potentially responsible for revving up the metabolism? I think in one of the studies, I think I sent it to you. I tried to send you a couple things, but in one of the studies, I think they found it was pretty significant, the amount of calories that people were able to eat. I think it was like almost 800 calories. And, it's just one study, so we can't like bank everything on one study, but I'm also recognizing from myself, Cole Robinson, and the comment section of people trying this diet, it seems like people are able to lose a lot of weight. There are some extremes to it. It is kind of annoying, only eating 30 grams of fat a day. We could be all in a caloric deficit, I'm sure, but some people are saying like, hey, I think I'm eating 2,500 calories or 3,000 calories. Now, they could be reporting incorrectly, so there's all those different things that are going on. But have you kind of heard about some of this honey diet, sugar diet stuff?
Yeah, I've seen it. And I think that, again, I think that there might be a minor benefit there from what the research that you showed me, although it's not conclusive or repeated. But I think you ended with where my mind goes immediately is when somebody says, I think I'm eating more calories. Generally speaking, they're not. The biggest thing is that carbohydrates are 4 calories per gram and fat's 9 calories per gram. So maybe you can eat more food as terms of a quantity, but not be eating more calories. I've always talked about hidden calories, and this isn't to demonize fats. And so please understand, this entire conversation isn't about choosing high carbohydrate or low carbohydrate diet. This isn't a bash on keto. There's pros and cons to all of these diets, whether it be keto, intermittent fasting, or vegan or carnivore. There's pluses and minuses. But with respect to calories, most of the time the hidden calories are the what the food's prepared in. Just 1 tablespoon of oil, for instance, in a stir fry or a meal that you're cooking is 130 calories. Or a dip that you might put your chicken nuggets in. Whether you should be eating chicken nuggets or not is a completely different conversation. But once you start putting it in those dips, some of those dips are 200 or 300 calories, and things like that can add up quick. How much hidden calories, particularly at restaurants, because they cook a lot of things in a lot of oil. And again, this isn't a good food, bad food conversation about saturated fats versus polyunsaturated fats. It's just a calorie conversation in general. It's much easier to hide those liquid calories. And so maybe they are eating more food, but by eliminating fats, you do much the same thing that a keto dieter does. When a keto dieter eliminates carbs, they're also eliminating a lot of ultra-processed foods that are high in calories because they're a combination of sugars and fats. Well, if a high-carb individual is trying to stay under 50 or 40 grams of fat or less, they're also not going to be able to eat those same foods. Even ice cream, for instance, gets knocked off the list because it's pretty high in fat, also high in sugar. You could substitute you could substitute a low-fat ice cream that maybe you make at home in your Foodie, in your Ninja blender. Creamy, yeah. I haven't gotten one yet, but I just ordered one based on our last conversation with.
Yeah,
I've never. Yeah, I don't see Nsima get excited about too much, but my God, his eyes just lit up when he talked about the creamy.
Yeah, his girlfriend, I think she competed and used that. She did a bikini show, I believe. Got on stage and looked great and had ice cream every night.
Yeah, and therein, it lies the rub. Is that assuming you can maintain a calorie deficit and stay satisfied, that'd be the great thing. If you had a diet that was actually enjoyable and sustainable, I always say compliance is the science. And I think that's kind of what you've fallen onto here, and you're benefiting, as an athlete from the carbohydrates. So again, I'm back to calories on that conversation. I'm going to have a hard time. I'll be hard pressed to say there's enough evidence to suggest that the energy expenditure side of that equation is meaningfully improved by your choice of macronutrient.
Yeah, and what about the energy? So the energy coming in, resulting maybe in just a lot better output for a lot of people.
I would say in terms of performance, possibly as maybe some people find that when they get rid of carbs, they have more sustained energy, and they get rid of brain fog. I see that very commonly in the anecdotes regarding that diet. And someone on a high carb, low fat diet may feel more energy. That's certainly a reasonable, assessment for them to make of themselves. A low fat, high carb diet might make them feel like they have more energy. And so, again, we're back to anecdotes and testimonials, which of course is on the lowest tier of evidence on the hierarchy of evidence scale. But I think it's important, and that's why a lot of doctors or nutritional practitioners will always say, in my clinical experience. And I'd be cautious to say that group of people is, it's confounded by the group of people that you're working with is, they're all participating in your program, and you don't see the people who leave your program. It's called a selection bias.
When it comes to something like bodybuilding, is it possible to get on stage in bodybuilding without kind of feeling like crap? You kind of hear that reported all the time. Is there a way to circumvent that somehow, or you're going to kind of always feel like shit being 4% body fat?
It's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. Now, you can delay that as long as possible. We opened up talking about the fact you mentioned the vertical diet was more diverse. And when you said eating more, I came out, many, many years ago, more than a decade, talking about the guru diets that were so restrictive in terms of the diversity of foods, and people were demonizing red meat, and they were demonizing dairy, and they were demonizing fruit, and they were demonizing even the egg yolk and salt. And so, I introduced the vertical diet to show that you could have a much more, and should have a much more diverse diet to manage the micronutrient needs. And sodium and potassium was a huge component of that. That seems to be, like with the keto diet, and they call the keto flu. It seems to be generally the cause of that is not necessarily carbohydrate depletion, but also, and maybe primarily, the electrolyte depletion, causing people just to be a bit dehydrated. Sodium in particular, but potassium being huge for energy and blood sugar management, etc. So. I just think that some people kind of over-restrict in the diversity of foods, and that's going to give them micronutrient deficiencies. Sodium's another big one. And I think that a lot of folks do cut carbs too aggressively pre-contest, and I've always been a proponent of cutting fats first and keeping the carbs in there, because we do see a performance advantage, particularly for anaerobic training with carbohydrates. And ultimately, what's going to determine your ability to maintain lean body mass is going to be the training stimulus, as we talked about earlier. And in so much as the training stimulus is influenced by carbohydrates, then that would seem to me to be the last thing you'd want to lower in the diet is your carbohydrates. So I generally pull fat first. When I worked with Nadia Wide, who was a third-place Miss Olympia and second-place Arnold Classic, she was eating a pretty high-carb diet, and dairy and meat all the way up to the show. We just went down to a fat-free Greek yogurt, and we went down to a grass-finished top sirloin, so that the fats were very, very low. And we brought her fats down to probably 30 grams a day, and kept the carbs as high as we could, as long as we could. And I had her doing more lifting. We would do double splits. We would do, say, chest in the morning, back at night. And so her volume was compromised, and it always will be, but her intensity, her effort, the loads that she was using, we tried to keep her going as heavy as possible, as long as possible, and trying not to lose too much strength, reps, or meaning reps or weight, not necessarily sets. I was much less concerned with the number of sets she did, but I was more concerned with were the sets that she did do pretty close to her best performance? Was she still able to match her PRs in the off season? And the better you can manage that decline in performance, the more muscle you're going to hold on to, and the more carbohydrates you're able to consume going into a show. I think the better energy that you're going to have. But ultimately, as I said before, if you want to be healthy, don't compete. And that last month can be a real tough slog.
What about when it comes to how much you eat, and how much you're able to perform along with you know, how much you eat in relation to motivation, how much you eat in relation to, like, it seems like if you eat less, that it does your metabolism seems to be a moving target. Am I correct with that?
If you eat fewer calories, yeah, and if you lose weight, you're obviously going to downregulate your basal metabolic rate because you just have less mass to support. Which is why maintaining muscle is so important.
Yeah, it seems like a critical point, because we know that we know that the road to what we're trying to do when you're trying to lose weight is to lower calories, but it's a real bitch, because then you're not as motivated to move as much, and you lose some of your NEAT and some of those things, right?
Indeed, yeah, and that's a huge component there. NEAT is a greater, energy expenditure than exercise activity. Non-exercise activity, when you get close to a show, starts to you end up just getting tired and wanting to sit more is what happens. And we like to use step counters for that. And if you can maintain your step volume, much the same way I mentioned maintaining your strength, then you can do your best to try and stave off the non-exercise activity. But even the amount of hours you're standing during a day, oftentimes, and have many times in the past, had bikini competitors come to me a month out from the show and said they've completely stalled in their progress, and they measure their progress on the scale. Unfortunately, that's the only progress measure. So, and by then they're already at, usually under 1,500 calories, maybe 1,250 sometimes, and they're already doing at least 40 minutes twice a day of cardio, maybe more sometimes, and they haven't been able to lose any weight in 2 weeks. And at that point, I can't cut their calories anymore, and I can't add any cardio to their training. At that point, I'm just asking them to check their step count, and make sure that they're consistent, and then stay on their feet all day. At that point, again, this is a short-term intervention for an already terrible situation. I've got bikini competitors dieting for shows on 2,250 up to 2,500 calories a day. These are small. These are 117, 125 pound women, because they've fixed that problem by, reverse dieting to back up to eat more calories and gaining more muscle tissue, and then training harder. And it's not to say that these women don't train hard. I just don't think that they train effectively. I think that they start increasing their reps and decreasing their loads, and I think they lose muscle tissue at such a rapid degree going into a show that they also lose a lot of the energy expenditure side, and end up having to eat fewer and fewer calories. So, I would suggest keeping those calories as high as possible, as long as possible.
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, they try to lower their calories. They're well-meaning. They might lose 5 pounds, 8 pounds. But once they kind of lose anything more than like 5 pounds, I think they start to struggle with their motivation of like continuing on to, get the steps in and so forth, just because either their energy out is becoming great, or the overall caloric deficit is becoming kind of cumbersome in some ways. But I like what you said earlier. There's a bunch of stuff that you mentioned that I think is really helpful. Just the little stuff, standing more, adding to your step count a little bit. And adding to your step count doesn't mean you go from 3,000 to 10,000. It's just some small additions can really make a big difference. And it doesn't mean you go from, not standing at all to standing like 7 hours a day. Just titrate these things in and have them be a little bit more natural. But you also did mention like having like a workout split where someone, and I realize that this isn't available to everyone all the time, but exercising multiple times a day in some format could be great for people. And for people that are thinking like, oh man, I got to go to the gym twice a day, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like, I don't know, maybe you get home from work, you worked out maybe in the morning, and maybe you just do like some squats and some push-ups later on in the evening with your kid or something like that. These little things, they sound like super minor, but over time they kind of add up. And what I've found for myself is it just becomes part of your life. It's not, you don't seem like a workout crazy person or anything like that. It feels like it's just part of your day. You don't feel like you're dragging yourself to do these things, but over time you can get yourself to be able to handle more. But if you're trying to always eat less and move more, that could be very difficult, because you just don't have the energy coming in you don't have the materials coming in to be able to perform the way that you'd like.
Well, that's true, and you hit on a couple things that are important there, and we have to make the distinction between competitive athletes and soccer moms. And you mentioned if you've got kids and what have you, not the ideal situation for competing in shows, because it could be a pretty selfish endeavor, and you got to make a lot of sacrifices, and it is harder for a working mom with two kids to be able to try and compete in a show at the same time. So I'm going to be cautious with the recommendations to make sure that we're specific, that if we're talking about a competitor who doesn't have those concerns, then I'm going to have them do more. And if we're talking about a soccer mom, then I'm going to do just the opposite. I'm going to try and find what's the least amount necessary, so that, because the priority for her obviously is going to be family and career and those things. And so for those folks, I'm heavy on the energy intake side. I'm really focused on getting them high satiety foods, more whole foods, obviously more salads, more filling foods. I'm back to the satiety index. We talk about boiled potatoes and oranges and things that just fill you up for longer. We talk about the total volume of food that you eat. That's very low in calorie density, and we had the conversation about liquid oils and how those sneak into your food. So if we can just, through awareness and through education, give the soccer moms an opportunity to eat a larger volume of food and net out fewer calories from that food, then that's a big win for them. The exercise side, and we've talked about this before, what we call the compensation. It's the trying to think who's the author of that study. It'll come to me, but oftentimes when people do more exercise, they end up sitting more and eating more. They get hungrier, and so I wouldn't recommend. Obviously exercise is great to a point. Like you said, you don't have to go from 3,000 steps to 10,000 steps, but even the American Heart Association recommends only 150 minutes a week, and just 3 10-minute walks a day is 210 minutes a week might be sufficient. But more exercise does not equal more weight loss, and that's borne out in the research, because people just get hungry and tired. They sit more and eat more, and they burn fewer calories per hour invested in the same exercise. If you do 30 minutes of cardio and maybe you burn 300 calories on day one, by day 30 you're only burning 130 calories for the same 30 minutes of cardio. Your body just becomes more efficient at it, and it starts burning, becoming protective and compensating for the extra exercise. So not suggesting not exercising, I'm suggesting the energy expenditure side of the equation is not where you should be focusing your attention for weight loss.
When it comes to back to the sugar diet type stuff, what are some negative side effects of sugar, even when it's kind of by itself, and even when you're like regulating your calories? Are there some, obviously you got like the teeth, like, hammering a lot of sugar all day, you might want to brush your teeth a little extra and make sure that your hygiene is good on that. But is there any other like major concerns? One person asked about like glycation. Has there been any information or studies to show that sugar can cause some damage when you're not in abundance of calories?
Now, if you're talking about a metabolically healthy individual, no. If you're talking about somebody who already has compromised health, either through insulin resistance or, dyslipidemia, elevated LDL, or high blood pressure, those kinds of things, then, that could be a problem. But is the sugar causing the problem, or is the sugar aggravating a problem that already exists? And so if we're talking about metabolically healthy people, then I just don't see any downside to that, presuming we've got adequate protein, adequate fats, adequate micronutrients. I would suggest that the carbohydrates that you do eat, the bulk of them, like the foundation of the vertical diet is carbohydrates that are high in potassium, potatoes, berries, those kinds of things. Obviously, vegetables, carrots is a big one for me, and cucumber, low-gas vegetables. But, once you've satisfied all of that and you need additional calories, then if those come from some added sugars or from, say, rice even, of course we have all those studies on the rice diet by Walter Kempner. That was way back in the 1930s. And, that kind of spawned the Pritikin diet, the Ornish diet, John McDougall's diet. Even some of the Ray Peat literature was heavily borrowed from Walter Kempner's studies. And they saw huge weight losses and reversal of diabetes and high blood pressure and cholesterol from eating around a 95% carbohydrate diet, largely from rice, with 4% protein and 2%, 3% fat. Now, these were short-term interventions, up to 3 months, to be honest with you. And I think that there's a lot of recommendations made for initial interventions to people with pretty severe chronic conditions, and diabetes being one. I think the most effective diet for diabetes is a pretty large calorie deficit, maybe 50% of your calories, and a liquid diet has been shown repeatedly in studies to be the most effective for reversing type 2 diabetes the quickest. It is weight loss, that's driving the reversal, but they're just showing what's the quickest way to lose weight, and they're saying that a liquid diet at a very high calorie deficit, and that's exactly what Walter
people are doing that with
doing.
fructose, right? I mean, they're doing that with fruit and fruit juice sometimes.
Yeah, and that brings up another concern. People are complaining about fruit juice, saying that it's the same as soda, and we know that's not the case, and largely because of the polyphenols, even though it's lower in fiber than, say, fruits. But fruits are fantastic. We've done studies of fruits up to almost any level of consumption shows an improvement in metabolic health and weight loss, etc. But I've been talking about orange juice for forever. It was a decade ago that at the Iceland seminar, again, I did a whole presentation talking about the benefits of orange juice. I don't think that overweight people should be eating drinking a lot of their calories, but in your circumstance, under in a calorie deficit, orange juice is not the same as soda. Orange juice has been shown to decrease uric acid, to decrease ALT, liver enzymes, to decrease lipids, LDL lipids, to decrease blood sugars as well, HA1C measurements. And so there's a special thing about fruits, and even fruit juices, when you're eucaloric or in a caloric deficit in particular, that are very different than just straight sugar, say, from a soda, in terms of their health benefits, and they largely attribute that to polyphenols. But we do have plenty of studies on orange juice, comparing orange juice to Coca-Cola, and it's a very different effect, a health effect from orange juice. And in the absence of a calorie surplus, even the Coca-Cola didn't show any increase in diabetes unless there was a surplus.
Jay Cutler was drinking all those Cokes back in the day.
Yeah, well, certain people can get away with it. You
I think it was
most
post
certainly.
Workout though, and he's got 300 pounds of muscle on him.
Yeah, and you're metabolically healthy, and post workout's a great time to get in carbohydrates. It actually helps minimize muscle damage and start repair. I know we used to think that there was a protein, an anabolic window for protein. And turns out that it's more like an anabolic garage door, as long as you're somewhere between 5 and 6 hours between your last meal and your next meal, whether it was a workout in between. So eat 2 hours before, eat 2 hours after. It seems it's fine. But carbohydrates, we do see, post-workout in particular, a measurable decrease in DOMS, an improvement in the rate of recovery. And if you're going to train twice a day, I've talked about carbs and sodium as being critical for recuperating for the second workout of the day. And again, that bout of performance is what's going to dictate progress. And if that bout with any athlete is insufficient because of some substrate deficiency, be it carbohydrates or hydration from sodium, then you're just not going to have as good of a workout, and that is going to impair your long-term performance. So I think it kind of depends on who's doing it, what condition they're in, and for what purpose, and are they meeting all of their other foundational requirements.
I like that you've stuck to your guns on a lot of things over the years, and I think it's great. And you've always just said better is better, and I think that's just so simple. Like, okay, you got the option between the Coke and the orange juice. It's like, well, better is better. Like, yes, you can have the Coke. That's fine. You can drink it. I'm not saying you can't do it, but better is better, and try to make the best possible choice that you can make repeatedly. Do you think that fructose, is there any reason to be concerned over fructose with fatty liver disease, or is this back to the same answer of like, hey, if you're metabolically healthy, there's probably not much reason to even worry about it too much, and if you're not over consuming calories, then it really doesn't matter what the specifics are of the food that you're eating?
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head. In the absence of a calorie surplus, we've got dozens of studies showing substituting fructose for sucrose and we don't see any difference. So we've had studies showing up to 200 grams of fructose a day, which you would never get in a regular diet because there's no pure fructose food, no pure fructose sugar, really. Even a Coca-Cola is be a 55-45 split, or fruits it'd be a pretty close to a 50-50 split of fructose and glucose. So if you're going to eat 200 grams of pure fructose a day, which is what the studies did, they substituted up to 200 grams of fructose a day, and they did not see, and that's 800 calories from pure fructose. They did not see, in the absence of a calorie surplus, not only did they not see that it was addictive, they didn't see any increased hedonic behavior. It wasn't inflammatory. There's multiple studies showing that it didn't show any signs of inflammation, whether it was C-reactive protein or homocysteine or all of those inflammation markers. They didn't. They also showed that it didn't increase liver fat or obesity. You just, in the absence of the calorie surplus, it doesn't seem to be an independent effect of fructose on any of those health markers.
There was a diet, or there was a study done years ago. I can't not remember what study it was, but I believe it was a pretty big study, and it was on fruit. And I think you and I talked about this in the past, but they just kept feeding people more and more fruit. And I think they kept thinking that people were going to gain weight, but they weren't gaining any weight. And I think the result of the study was just that people pooped way more than they've seen in like previous studies or something like that. Do you recall any of that?
Yeah, I kind of briefly mentioned earlier that at any level, even eating as much fruit as you want, we consistently see improved health outcomes in the absence of a calorie surplus. And so, and we're seeing it more and more with the polyphenols, as mentioned, even with the orange juice. In the absence of fiber, but there's lots of fruits that I recommend in the diet and always have. Oranges obviously high in the satiety index, also high in potassium. But the berries, the low sugar fruits, the raspberries, the blueberries, and strawberries. I think raspberries have 5 grams of fiber per serving, and a pound of strawberries is only 130 calories. So these are fantastic swaps for people to use.
Watermelon,
in place of,
a lot of volume.
Yep, a lot of volume. With a lot of water. It's just a way for you to eat a lot fewer calories and still get some satiety, some sweetness in your diet. But yeah, there's no adverse effect to eating fruits. And again, as part of a healthy dietary pattern, you always want to make make that caveat. But fruit's something that I always saw in the guru diets that women in particular would avoid and would demonize, and it's totally unnecessary. And it could be very enjoyable and can provide, like I mentioned earlier, the energy that you need to perform better in your workouts.
I know you have a heavy pickleball schedule, so this will be the last thing I'll ask you. But on Jordan Syatt's podcast, you were telling people to sit down, and I thought that was really powerful. Can you share some of that with us? I thought that was epic.
Well, I was talking about a lot of people getting on and squawking about people using GLP-1 agonists, semaglutide, Wegovy, Ozempic, and then now the new tirzepatides, and people were complaining about saying it was cheating or a whole host of other things. And I just said that they're so incredibly effective, and we see, for the first time in ever, since the obesity epidemic has been rapidly increasing since the 70s, that we're starting to see kind of a tapering off, and largely as a result of the fact that people do now have access to these GLP-1 agonists that curb appetite and get rid of food noise and allow people just to maintain a calorie deficit and lose weight. And that the health benefits from that are astounding in terms of diabetes reversal, blood pressure reduction, lipid reduction, cancer risk reduction, and people are complaining about that. And I said, there's so many other things that people do from any medications, whether it's birth control or whether it's from hypogonadism needing TRT, or from low thyroid, hypothyroidism needing thyroid, just a host of different medications that people take. and then to be complaining or drinking alcohol or any other things that people do that are obviously bad for your health, and then passing judgment. And I just said that, you know, for each individual to be, you know, to kind of look inward first, and if you're someone who is benefiting from any medication and any medical intervention, that you should probably just sit down and let these folks, you know, decide on the cost-benefit ratio with their doctor as to what the benefits are. And you know, that it kind of, I mentioned cancer, and that was one of the things that just popped into my head that came up in as somebody in your in one of your feeds on one of your comments, so the dumpster fire that I call your comment section, and we don't see any evidence of that either with sugar consumption in the absence of a calorie surplus. There's been a lot of claims. Mark Hyman's one of the people who's just always out claiming that cancer causes, or that sugar causes cancer, and 70% of cancers are caused by sugar. I think he said that on Huberman's podcast recently. And there's no evidence to support that. Heritability of cancer, meaning your genetic predisposition, is probably accounts for over a third of cancers, and so if 2/3 is lifestyle, and the vast majority of those are caused by smoking and alcohol and drugs and overexposure to sun, and pollution, obesity, lack of exercise, stress, that leaves very little room for cancers or sugar's potential effects. But we do have human research. We don't have a single study showing that sugar causes cancer in the absence of a calorie surplus and obesity, which can happen with any food. But we do have some studies on consumption of sugar, sugary foods, and sugary beverages in relation to cancer risk, and that there was no evidence showing that it contributed to cancer. And
I think what people are referring to is maybe like the Warburg effect, which I'm sure you're well aware of. Is that?
Yeah, that's been proven. It's been proven.
It seems like cancer wants to run off of like glucose or something along those lines. Is that right?
Yeah, well, and cancer can run off of anything.
True.
Cancers are there's a very diverse, it's a very complicated disease. There's some clinical evidence showing that a keto diet can worsen cancer. I think the person to read up on that is, or to look at that, is Dr. Joey Zundel. He's a cancer biologist, and he does a good job of breaking down the fact that sugar doesn't feed cancer, and that oftentimes it's important for probably a third of all cancer death is a result of cachexia, which is a loss of muscle tissue, just a wasting disease, and that calories become important at that point, just to stave off the wasting effects of cancer and cancer treatment. But I think people have, there's been a lot of talk lately about how cancer rates how cancer's increased, and in fact, cancer survivorship has grown, but the actual cancer rates per capita have dropped over 30% in the last 20 years, and that's while sugar consumption has gone down as well over the last 20 or 30 years. So while obesity has gone up and diabetes has gone up, so hard to correlate those two by that standard. But I think that people have looked at I've seen some posts by Callie Means and others on the internet showing that, trying to show that an increase in cancer survivorship means that cancer has increased, and it hasn't. Cancer rates have gone down significantly over the last, certainly since the 70s, but over the last 20 years have gone down significantly. You have to differentiate between, plus we're an older population, which cancer tends to mostly be prevalent in as you age, and we're a growing population, so you have to look at it per person, cancer rates by per capita, and those have declined significantly, and as has sugar consumption. So I'm just not inclined to think there's anything alarming about what you're doing. I think a lot of what I see on your comment section is unsupported by the evidence. I think a lot of people
get in there and fight for me, Stan. Get in there and get mad at me.
Boy, if I had enough hours in a day, it could be frustrating. Because people are pretty steeped in their beliefs, and generally speaking, they're just repeating something that they heard from their famous influencer or their favorite influencer on the internet, and they probably understand very little about the actual hierarchy of evidence and how an appeal to authority is on the lowest tier of that hierarchy of evidence. and that the body of evidence, looking at the actual research, and in particular the human trials, and we have many. A lot of people refer to sugar's effect in terms of addiction behavior or what have you on animals, on mice or rats. We don't see the same effect on humans in terms of cancer, in terms of addiction, in terms of NAFLD and obesity. So we do have human trials, and I think that folks probably don't have the necessary training to interpret the literature, and generally are just repeating what somebody else said. But even if you look at what somebody else said and the evidence that they post, they're generally just reading the abstract and not looking, and probably not human trials, and they're not looking at the actual methods. So that's my preach on that. If you're making a comment and don't have evidence to support it, and if it isn't human evidence, then you should sit the fuck down. How about that? Go back to Jordan Syatt's podcast and GLP-1 agonists. Just sit the fuck down. Maybe this is a conversation for people who actually know what they're talking about.
I love it. Thank you so much. And where can people purchase the Vertical Diet? Where can they find you and find out more information on you?
Yeah, everything's at stanefferding.com. I have a link to my meal prep company where we send meals nationwide. I have a link to the Vertical Diet 4.0 ebook, which I have updated and provided for free to anybody who has purchased a previous version. We're now at the 4.0 rendition, which has been great to expand upon that and add links and research and stuff over the years, especially with Dr. Damon McHugh's help, PhD, RDN, Director of Dietetics at UNLV. So we've got lots of evidence to support it. And then, obviously, I've talked a lot about, you and I both talked a lot about blood testing for over a decade, 15 years now. You and I have been encouraging people, and now it seems like everybody's doing it, and I think that's great. I think that the folks at Merrick Health are doing a fantastic job of doing blood tests and giving out fantastic information on the results of those blood tests. So that's who I use currently. I've used many services in the past, and I found them to be very helpful. So I do have a blood test link on my site. YouTube, Stan Efferding. I think those rants are still pretty relevant, even though they're dated. It seems like everything just keeps repeating itself. Much of the stuff I've said for a decade is still being discussed today in much the same way. And Instagram is at Stan Efferding.
Well, and everybody, this is episode 1 of I'm opening up Super Friends, videos like this where I'm just going to be checking in with someone like Stan to just make sure whatever the hell it is that I'm doing is not too stupid. So he can kind of fact check me, and we can kind of just continue to go from here. But thank you for being on today. Appreciate it.
Hey, I always do this. I tend to be a little long-winded, but there's one other thing that's really important that was also mentioned in your comment section, and that's people talking about sugar spikes. When you eat sugar, your blood sugars elevate. That's a normal physiological response to consuming sugar, and that does not cause diabetes. We already talked about that earlier. But there is a really interesting study I took note of here, because when your blood sugar goes up, obviously your beta cells release insulin to help bring that blood sugar down and distribute it through your liver or your muscles or your fat storage. If it's excess, you're not utilizing it. They did a study, and so people would presume to think that you'd overwork your pancreas eventually and you would cause diabetes. And if that were the case, of course, then these GLP-1 agonists, which raise insulin, by the way, would prevent weight loss and cause diabetes, and they do neither. They do just the opposite. But they did a great study. It was on called The Future Cardiometabolic Implications of Insulin Hypersecretion in Response to Oral Glucose, a Prospective Cohort Study. This was done on 300 women, and they over a course of 4 years, and they looked at their beta cell glucose or insulin response to glucose spikes, insulin from insulin response to a glucose challenge, which was drinking glucola, which is what they do to check your insulin sensitivity. And here's a really interesting conclusion that they made regarding its impact on the pancreas. After 4 years, the higher response at baseline is a significant independent predictor of lower future risk of prediabetes and diabetes. Thus, a robust post-challenge insulin secretory response does not indicate adverse cardiometabolic health, but rather predicts favorable metabolic function in the years to come. So to translate that, the women in this study who had the higher glucose spike post-challenge had the healthier pancreas, and that seems to be consistent with just about everything else that we challenge ourselves with in our life, whether it be our workouts. The acute challenges actually cause us to be more robust long term, and that's what this study evidenced for metabolically healthy individuals.
So it's true. You can train your metabolism. You can train your reaction to your glucose, I guess.
Absolutely true.
All right. Strength is never weak. This week is never strength. Catch you guys later.
Thanks, brother.